right. Moving on our agenda, under number 11 is the superintendent's report. So Dr. Ross, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board, and our community. It's certainly great to recognize our students and our school counselors, and Lake Murray Elementary have some other celebrations. I think in the PAC championship we had the Dutch Fork boys are also scheduled to be recognized as well. So congratulations to them. At this time, the monitor is not here, so I'll look up here. As always, we are guided by three critical questions in our work, and that is, why do we do this work? How do we do this work? And what are our outcomes? Our vision is that we love and grow our students. Our mission is guided by this umbrella of protection for each student so that they can cross a bridge of support to success. And we use this each and every day to get to our system outcomes. We, in our strategic plan, are guided by 4 goals. Those goals are under the 2 themes of love and grow, to ensure that every student is loved in our schools and every student has demonstrated academic growth in our schools. And our goal is to stay focused on growth and development. That's the hallmark of what we do. We're under our strategic plan, and we want to make sure that we're focused on that growth and development each and every day. And so one of the things that we do is look at the academic growth throughout the year. That academic growth by proviso is measured on the measures of academic progress. We do fall, winter, and spring administrations of this test or assessment from elementary and middle school English and math. You see where we are in fall and where we are in terms of the winter. And so each and every day we're working very hard, our teachers, our staff, administrators, to get those students who are off level back on level, and those students who are on level to maximize their potential. This is the daily work that should be at the focus of what we do each and every day. We also have an imperative in our high schools for accountability in terms of graduation rate. We track this weekly. Our graduation teams, our school counselors that we recognize today, are working to make sure that behind each one of these numbers there's a name and a story. If we understand the story of the student, then we can help overcome the challenges that that student faces. So you see our goal is to be at 90.28% at the end of the year. We're battling between that 85 to 88% graduation rate. These challenges are overcoming the challenges that exist within our community and our schools, but we're very confident in the team that is working each and every day to ensure that these students cross the stage on time. In addition to that, we want to make sure that when they cross the stage prepared for their lives. And their lives are different than our past. It's their future, which is totally different from our past. Right now, we have 543 students who are neither college nor career ready. And we hope that with the spring administration of our work ready assessment, that we will make a huge a reduction in this number. We're also thankful to, again, most of those counselors that we recognize today, that we have students in our First Jobs program that would help with college and career readiness. So we're really excited about the work that we're doing to ensure that our school board of our system outcomes is ever progressing onward and upward. And so with that, I'm going to turn over the presentation to our Director of Elementary Education, Ms. Tina McCaskill, to give us our academic report on one of our administrative agenda items, grading. So, Ms. McCaskill.
Madam Chair, Dr. Ross, and board, thank you for letting me be here tonight to talk about grading. Not necessarily the most fun topic to talk about, but something that we certainly need to look at. If we think about the why of why we would go to grading, well, let's go back to this one. go the why of grading. If you think about, we were last had our advanced ed / Cogni, as it's called now. We had that visit. That was recommended to us as one of the priorities for us to look at. Whenever the pandemic came in, we realized there were just some things in grading that weren't necessarily equal across the board. You as a board have asked us to look at grading. And so that's the why behind what we're going to do. And up to this point, we have done a little bit with grading since our last visit with advanced ed / Cogni, as it's called now. But we've done things like major and minor assignments. How many days should those be posted into PowerSchool? So we've done some of that work so far. And it's also a piece of work that's really personal. Whenever you're talking about grading your students' assignments, that's a personal piece of teachers. But we want to make sure that we're looking at all aspects of that. And one thing that we want to look at is all of the pieces. And this Wordle just puts a lot of those things that we have to think about in terms of grading. Whether you're going to do extra credit, is it percentages, is it weighting, is it accuracy, is it completion, do you do retakes? There's so many pieces and parts to grading to look at. So we want to make sure that we do that in a way that's consistent and it's systematic. And we want to follow Dr. Ross's philosophy with doing that. So whenever we look at the vision for grading, we want to take some time with our administrators, with our stakeholders, to build a philosophy of grading. Why do we grade? Ensure that everyone system-wide knows why we grade. We don't grade just to say, hey, you get an 80 or you get a 70. The grading is truly about what students know. Have they mastered the material? That's what it's for. It's to help us grow instructionally as well as grow intellectually with students, and for students to understand what that grade means. What is it that they can do? If they want to get 100, what do they do to get 100? If they want to get an 80, what do they do to get an 80? To make sure that they know specifically what those requirements are or expectations are. Then that philosophy is going to take us into the how. How do we do that? What processes do we need to put in place to make sure that system-wide, wherever you are in District 5, the same grading practices take place? And then finally, the outcomes. Those are what do the report cards look like? What PD is necessary? What professional development is necessary for teachers? What's necessary for parents to understand the grading practices? What's necessary for students to understand the grading practices? All of those pieces and parts will be important for us to identify throughout this process. So it's not going to be like tomorrow. It's not going to be next month. But it's going to take some time. And so you'll see on this slide, this just is a summary of sort of how we'll go about doing that. We'll create a grading philosophy. Hopefully this year we'll be able to solidify that philosophy. And then we'll begin establishing committees that will have school committees and district committees that will have all groups. So we'll have parents involved, teachers involved, administrators involved, students involved in these conversations. We're going to do some research on grading practices. What are our neighboring districts doing? What's happening across the nation with grading? There's lots and lots of research out there that we've already begun to gather and look at. Engage our advisory groups. We've got our parents advisory, our faculty advisory, looking at all of those pieces and parts, community advisory groups, to get input from them. And then we're looking at implementation for the 24-25 school year. So that's about 1.5 years away, but it will take that time to make sure that once we start it, it's started systematically with clear expectations so that everyone understands. So it doesn't matter what school you go to, if you transition from one to the other, that will just it'll be a smooth transition with grading. So Dr. Ross, that's it for grading.
Madam Chair, members of the board, we pause for any questions before we move on to the accountability report.
Do we have any questions? All right, Dr. Ross.
All right,
Thank
very
you.
good, thank you. All right, at this time, I'm going to ask that Dr. Holden come forward and bring to us our accountability update.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ross and members of the school board. For tonight's presentation, it was not included in our board packet from last week because some of the information we intended to present tonight was still under embargo. That embargo was supposed to lift today. It was also supposed to lift previously as well, but the state has encountered some issues along the way. So actually, the information we intended to present tonight as well is still embargoed. So what we're doing tonight is trying to give you some information ahead of time so you are aware of some information related to school improvement designations. So please, if you will, you have a PowerPoint in front of you, or you can follow along on the screens as well. But again, we have had to make some minor revisions today as we anticipated the embargo would be lifted on the 13th, which is today, but it was not. It will be lifted whenever the state releases the information to the public. So first, we're going to be reviewing the report card rating formula. I think that's pretty essential, given that we've got some new folks on the board and we haven't discussed the report card rating information since it was released in October. We're going to talk about the specific school improvement designations, and then we're going to talk about next steps for the district. Okay. So first, all schools in the state of South Carolina receive a report card rating. That's part of our state accountability plan. Okay. There are elements of the accountability plan that are required by state and federal law, and school improvement designations are among those requirements. So these are pieces that are legislated. They come from the federal government and the state government in some cases. The school improvement designations that we are waiting on the public release of, that comes from 2022 school report cards. Again, those were released in October, and that comes from data that was on the 2022 school report card. What I thought was important was that we talk about what goes into those school report card ratings. Okay, so we're going to spend the next few slides talking about those report card ratings and how they're calculated before we move into the school improvement designations. And before we do that, one of the first areas we have to understand is English learners' proficiency progress. That is a measure that only counts towards a school's report card rating if the school has 20 or more English learners who participate in the access assessment or have been deemed proficient and have progressed out of the access assessment. Now, the last time that we did school report cards was in 1819, and at that time, the students who were already proficient were not included in the denominator, so many of our schools did not have 20 English learners in the group. There were only 8 schools that had that element on their school report card in 1819. This year, when the 21-22 report cards came out, 17 of our schools did. That's because they were just below 20 a few years ago, and now they're above 20, okay? So this element counts for 10% of a school's report card rating, but the key factor here is it only counts when there's 20 or more English learners who are participating in access or have been deemed proficient. So here's what that looks like in our elementary, intermediate, and middle schools. So when a school has 20 or more English learners, you can see the variables and how much they're worth. First, you have achievement on SC Ready, which includes English Language Arts and Mathematics, or SC Alt as well. And that's worth 35% of the school's overall rating. You have achievement on SC Pass, which is administered in grades 4 through 6, and SC Alt in science. You have English Learners Proficiency Progress, which is worth 10%. You have the Teacher-Student School Climate Survey, which is also worth 10%. And the last piece that you have is Student Progress, as measured by SC Ready, ELA, and Math, or SC Alt, ELA, and Math. Now, if there's less than 20 English learners in the school, you can see the report card rating weights here. You can see that what essentially happens is 5% is allocated to achievement, ELA, and Math, and another 5% is allocated to student progress. So those go from 35% to 40% of a school's overall rating. Student progress, given that it's weighted 35 to 40%, it's important that we understand how that's calculated. Half of the student progress rating, which is again 35 to 40% of the overall rating, half of that comes from the progress of all students in the school, and the other half comes from the progress of students who are identified as being in the lowest 20% or the lowest quintile of students at the school. Each student gets a growth index, and those growth indices are averaged, and the school receives an overall rating. For high schools, the metrics are a little bit different. We focus on things that many of you are already aware of, things like graduation rate, college and career readiness, achievement on the Algebra 1, the English 1 at the time that it was administered. Now it's no longer administered. End of course tests, SEALT test, teacher school climate survey appears again as well. One important note here about the end of course assessments. We of course administer those every year, but for school report card purposes, the end of course assessment data that is reported on the school report card is reflective of when the student took it, and it's only reported when the student is in that graduating cohort. So for example, a student who takes Algebra 1 in 7th grade in our school district, that score for school report card purposes doesn't count until the student is graduating from high school, so it's in their 4th year of high school in that graduation cohort. Same thing with a student who takes Algebra 1 in 8th grade, Algebra 1 in 9th grade. The score does not get reported on the school report card until that student's 4th year of high school. So that's why when it says English 1 on there, I'm sure some of you said, well, we don't administer English 1 anymore. You're correct. But the students who took English 1 were in that graduating cohort last year. So English 1 was the assessment. This year it's just switched to English 2. Here's what that rating looks like when we take out the English Learners Proficiency Progress piece. You can see we just increased the amount of points available for graduation rate, and we increased the amount of points available in the achievement scores, which are Algebra 1, English 1, end of course assessments. Okay. Now I said all that to give you the groundwork for where these school improvement designations come from, because the overall rating that a school earns influences what school improvement designation they receive. A school improvement designation is based off of that report card rating for the entire school. It can also be based off of the report card rating points earned by a specific subgroup. It can be based off the overall rating itself, so not just the scale of 0 to 100 points, but unsatisfactory, below average, average, good, or excellent. Or in some cases, it can be based on graduation rate, not for the schools in our district, but for some of the schools in our state. What we're going to do next is we're going to walk through the 7 possible school improvement designations and talk about how a school qualifies for each one of those 7 designations. They include comprehensive support and improvement, additional targeted support and improvement, priority schools, targeted support and improvement underperforming subgroups, targeted support and improvement consistently underperforming subgroups, underperforming schools, and chronically underperforming schools. Those are the 7 possible designations. Over the next few slides, we're going to talk about how a school earns those designations. The first is a CSI school. CSI schools are only Title I schools at our elementary, middle, and high, with one exception here, which I'll talk about in a second. Essentially, a CSI school is a Title I school, where if we were to compare that Title I school's overall report card rating to all the schools in the state, they would fall in the bottom 5% of schools within their grade span. In addition, if you're a high school whose graduation rate is less than 70%, you are automatically a CSI school. In addition, if you're an ATSI school, which we'll talk about on the next slide, or sorry, 2 slides from now, ATSI schools that have not exited ATSI status after 2 consecutive cycles become CSI schools. And there you can see the cut scores at the top. So an elementary school that's Title I that falls below that 30.79, or middle school below a 27.48, or a high school below a 15.4, those schools are going to be a CSI school. But those cut scores also influence the next few slides that we'll see as well. Okay, so CSI is the first designation. The second designation is priority school. And a priority school is not just a Title I school. It's any school whose report card rating points fall in the bottom 10% of schools in their grade span. So the bottom, if your rating falls in the bottom 10% of any elementary school, a middle school, or a high school, depending on which one you are, then you are identified as a priority school, and that designation lasts for 3 years. One note here is if you're a CSI school, you cannot be a priority school. You can only be one or the other. Now, here's where things really start to get confusing for folks, okay? It's ATSI, okay? ATSI, which is additional targeted support and improvement, we start to focus on subgroups, okay? And what happens here is they isolate a subgroup within the school. So, for example, students with disabilities. Those students are pulled, and the state then looks to see what that subgroup, in this case students with disabilities, what their report card rating would have been if they were their own school, okay? And if that subgroup's report card rating performance would have put that as its own school in the bottom 5% of all schools in the state, that school is considered to be an ATSI school. So here you can say we looked at imaginary elementary school. and we identified students with disabilities as the subgroup. And you can see they earned 7.42 points in academic achievement, 1.94 points on preparing for success, 8.54 points in student progress, and 7.19 points for school climate. That's a total of 25 points, and that puts them in the bottom 5% of all elementary schools. The important part here is we're comparing a specific subgroup within a school to all schools, not just the subgroups at all the other schools. We're looking at a subgroup within one of our schools or within any school statewide, and we're looking at how that subgroup compares to the performance of every school, including all subgroups statewide. So that's a massive jump for some folks. It's something we have to spend a lot of time studying as well at our level, a lot of conversations, a lot of professional development at the state level on this piece to make sure accountability leaders statewide understand how this is done, and we in turn then try to help our principals and other district leaders understand what this looks like. I know Ms. McCaskill's also attended several meetings about this. Ms. Walters has as well, as we all try to better understand this information. So again, the key part with ATSI is we're looking at a subgroup, and the subgroup in this case represents its own independent school, and its performance is being compared to all schools statewide, okay? Then we have TSI. TSI looks at all the same idea, the subgroup, and instead of looking at the bottom 5%, we're looking at bottom 10%. Then TSI, consistently underperforming, is the same criteria, looking at a subgroup, and whether or not that subgroup was in the bottom 10% in 2017-18, 18-19, and 21-22. That's a consistently underperforming subgroup and their TSI. In addition, and super helpfully here, if you've already earned below average or unsatisfactory, you get a new label as well. It's underperforming school, because that was unclear from the original rating you received in October. In addition, you've got chronically underperforming schools, which are schools that are receiving an unsatisfactory overall report card rating in 17-18, 18-19, and 21-22. Okay, so those are the 7 different school improvement designations. Again, those were supposed to be released today, but they are under embargo for just a bit longer. So we're waiting on those official designations. We had some preliminary information that was under embargo. We have shared that with schools, but we're waiting on those official school improvement designations that come when the embargo is lifted, in case there are potential corrections. But we do have a process in place for what we're planning to do with that information. It's already involved meeting with our school principals. Ms. McCaskill, Ms. Walters, Mr. Giuliano, and Dr. Slatton and I are among the groups that have been looking at this over the last several weeks as the information has started to trickle out about it. Once we have those designations, again, the 7 different designations, we will bring that back, and once it's out of embargo, we'll bring that back to the Board of Trustees, and of course, we'll be working with our school leaders on that. The other part we're looking at is what are the specific requirements going to be? We know what the exit criteria are, but oftentimes it's not just exit criteria, it's what are the specific things we'll have to do. Perhaps as it relates to the strategic plan, do we need to develop a goal for a specific subgroup? Do we need to develop strategies and actions for a specific subgroup if a school is ATSI or TSI? The key part there is that district and school leaders will be collaborating together to ensure that we are addressing the needs of the students identified through the school improvement designation, whether that's a specific subgroup or the entire school. At this point, I'll turn it back to Dr. Ross and the board for any questions you may have.
Do we have any questions? Ms. Huddle?
I have 2 questions. One is, does the state give us any additional help for a school that is in a certain category?
Yes, some of the designations do come with this additional assistance, financially, professional development, those types of things. Now, one of the things we have heard, and I believe I can share this, I don't think this is embargoed, the state is anticipating that more schools will qualify for some of these designations this year. And if more schools qualify, the pot of money is not going to expand, so more schools will be sharing that existing pot of resources there. Okay. So yes, there are, in some cases, additional support that comes with that.
And my other question was, so if you have a school that has a lot of in and out transitory, like, I've heard some of our schools have upwards of 30% turnover. How does that affect this? Do we get any mulligans or help or anything with that if we're getting, because how can you be 4th grade when you didn't have them in 1st, 2nd, 3rd,
Yeah. No, ma'am. We do not get any additional, there's no additional weighting for that. a great point. As students takes Algebra 1 in ninth grade in a different district, moves to us. Doesn't matter they took Algebra 1 in that other district. If they are in their 4th year of high school with us, that's where we're going to take the Algebra 1 score, and it counts for our school report card rating. Similarly, student progress, they took the SC Ready at a different school in the state of South Carolina last year, took the second test with us. We take the student progress score. Similarly, our schools on graduation rate is a big one too. Schools that have high transiency, where there's a lot of students coming in and out. Every single one of those students who leaves our building, we have to have documentation for that we can submit to the state to remove those students from the graduating cohort. And I met with Irmo High School just a few weeks ago, and we were going through student by student in their what we call the 9GR20. Those are the students who are in their 4th year of high school right now, looking at specific documentation that existed and just the number of students within the last week who had moved in and out of the school. But the school had a great handle on that. But it is a challenge because, as Dr. Ross noted earlier, knowing the story of each one of those students, knowing where they are, what documentation we have to ensure, A, that we're properly serving the student, but B, if they have left us, that we have documentation that we can submit to the state to remove that student from the graduating cohort. You noticed on the CCR report earlier that he showed, there's like 1,464 students on that left-hand side. Well, we don't have 1,400 students currently enrolled in the as seniors or in that 9GR20. It's inclusive of any student who's touched our building in the last few years. And our schools that have a high transiency rate and a lot of in and outs, oftentimes, and we've seen that this year, they can have a lower enrollment of students who are seniors, but have a higher 9GR20 because of the number of students who are coming in and out of that class over the course of the 4 years of high school. And that's surprising to some folks when they see that denominator being as high as it is when the actual enrollment's a little bit lower because so many unique students have touched that building over the course of 4 years. Good question.
Mr. Satterfield.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions.
Yes, sir.
First of all, I'll comment, things have sure changed with school report cards.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. And this came from the Department of Education. Was this assembled were these standards and strategies put together, expectations by the State Department of Education?
In some cases, some of the designations are put together by the national standards, by the United States Department of Education and the ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act. Some of that comes from that piece of it. I don't want to misquote the legislation there, but I believe CSI is a federal requirement, and in some cases it's a state requirement as well.
And the reason I say that is Ms. Huddle's comment is pretty accurate in that it's like no consideration was given for those students or those schools that have a high turnover ratio. Another question is do they follow those? Do we as a district or other districts then have to follow those students and record their progress?
For which specific metrics, sir?
Well, I mean, if you get what we used to call unsatisfactory, but for those, when you're consistently or persistently unsatisfactory, for lack of a better word, is there, in your strategies, obviously you have to submit some sort of improvement plan or something like that. Do they require us to track those students and show their progress?
That's one of the pieces we're waiting to find out more about. Now, we do a lot of things to address that already. Internally, we have quite a few metrics and tools. For example, I mentioned lowest quintile. That's a group that counts for an additional half of the report card rating for student progress. We have a tool developed so every school in the district knows exactly who the lowest quintile is in their school in 4th and 5th grade, 6th, 7th, and 8th in ELA and math. We've got a new tool coming out on graduation rate that's intended to help schools identify those students by subgroup. We're doing the same thing with student progress in terms of demographic matching and looking at those pieces. So we've developed quite a few things internally to help with that through Tableau. There's, of course, pieces we're looking at there as well. What we're wondering in terms of the new requirements that might come out or might get shared with us, what are some of the specific things the state expects to see within our plans? Maybe it's a new goal. For example, we have a graduation rate and a CCR goal. If we have a high number of schools that are ATSI for students with disabilities, will they expect to see a graduation rate or a CCR goal specific to students with disabilities? Okay. Or if it's a different subgroup, students in poverty. If it's a racial ethnic subgroup, such as black students, Hispanic students, white students, will they expect to see a specific goal or a specific set of strategies that address the needs of those students?
Well, even those families or those schools that have a high rate of poverty in them, you know, you certainly know that. My last question is there any language in any of this, I didn't see it, where they'll come in if you're persistently underperforming? Do they take over, or do they?
Fortunately, we are not in that situation based on.
Well, I know we're not.
Yeah.
I was just curious what. Please don't.
I am unsure what the consequences of that one are,
Yeah.
and I hope that I don't become acquainted with it either.
Yeah.
So we are, and there is one that we didn't even cover, which is consistently underperforming districts, because we were focused on the school piece of it as well. I believe there are other things that happen there, and I don't want to touch the.
I know in the past
fencing.
that was part of the
Yeah.
the deal. Thank you.
Yes, sir. No problem. Good question.
Any other questions? All right, Dr. Ross.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Holden. And just as a wrap-up, Madam Chair, members of the board, as stated in our annual report, we recognize three major challenges in our district. That's the growth and mental health issues that we face each and every day in our schools and classrooms. Meeting grade level proficiency, just as outlined in that accountability report, the challenges that we have. I'm thinking we've had one school with over 40% transientness in our schools. So these are challenges of getting all of these students to grade level proficiency when you don't have them for a whole year, or you certainly don't have them for their K-12 experience. And then the growth of enrollment in Chapin, but addressing the growing facility needs in the Irmo schools. And so as we see, as we talked about earlier today in our workshop, we have opportunities. These opportunities persist, and what the evidence calls, it's evidence, peer-reviewed, evidence-based, social-emotional learning programs. Looking at connecting each student with a trusted adult that would help them in academics and goal settings, while maximizing the potential of our students in honors programs. And as we discussed in our workshop today, creating a 5-year master facilities plan to provide equity and access for all students in our district. So that's the work we do in District 5 as we continue to tell our story. And as tomorrow's Valentine's Day, Madam Chair, members of the board, as a donor, thought well enough to give each one of you a cactus heart and treats in honor of Valentine's Day. So we thank you for your help. At times you get the thanks and appreciation for loving and growing our students. So, Madam Chair, members of the board, that concludes the superintendent's report, and I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Ross. I love the cactus. Does anyone have anything for Dr. Ross before we move on? All right, seeing none.